I think access to justice means different things to different people. Access to justice for lawyers, maybe many lawyers may think it's something that they could work on some pro bono work or do charitable work for legal aid or something like that. And access to justice maybe to people in other countries in Canada, people might answer very differently. But certainly here in Canada, access to justice is really misunderstood, I think, by the average person. I think a lot of people think that because we live in Canada, everybody has equal access to justice, and that simply isn't the truth. If you have a higher income, you can certainly attain a much greater access to justice by way of hiring legal counsel. And if you're somebody on the other end of the spectrum that is very poor, you can also probably get legal services through legal aid. But the vast majority in the middle, I think of it almost like the bell curve, you know, the 80% in the middle. Most ordinary middle income earners really have a hard time being able to hire a lawyer and sustain having a lawyer over a long period of time. Certainly, most of us can afford a finite transactional type of legal service like a will or something like that, but with family law, where matters can go on for months or even years, the ability to retain a lawyer and keep a lawyer to help support your legal needs is becoming more and more challenging for most ordinary people. Sometimes when people think about access to justice, they think about it being an issue that affects mainly the poor. And in fact, it's an issue that affects pretty much everyone. Legal services have increased in cost tremendously over the last 30 years. And unfortunately, now in many urban settings, like Vancouver and Toronto, in family court, there's upwards of 70% of people are entering the courtroom without a lawyer, mainly due to the cost of legal services. And that's a really big problem for a lot of people. I think with family law, oftentimes people begin with a lawyer if they can. I can't actually imagine anyone deciding to just do this on their own, and I think that's a real misconception. A lot of people think that the people that may represent themselves are doing it because they think they can do a better job or they want to save money, when in fact the reality is that people represent themselves out of desperate need. And they may begin with a lawyer, and a common story is that a number of months go by and they use up the money that they have, and they just simply can't continue with their lawyer, and then end up having to make a really difficult decision to either just stop accessing the system or to try and go it alone, which is extremely challenging. You'd think we would, right? Solutions are hard to come by with access to justice. I've learned that by learning more about the perceptions of people who are actually insiders of the system. This is a complex matter, and there are so many complexities in the justice system that it's not easily solved, and it's not the fault of any one group. It's a systemic issue that affects almost every aspect of the justice system. And it'll require everybody's efforts to try to make meaningful change happen. Well, I think there isn't any one prototype of self-represented litigant. I think SRLs come from all walks of life. So there's people that have great means, who have maybe burned through a lot of their money and have only got a partway through their legal matter, and they end up having to represent themselves at some point along the journey. And then there's people at the very other end of the spectrum that have very little means and end up deciding to just try and resolve their legal matters on their own. And there's a great number of people, I think, stuck in the middle, that they're professional people, they have jobs, but they don't have the ability to spend tens of thousands of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars on legal services over a long period of time. I think it's really important for people to understand that very few people make a choice to just represent themselves rather than them being placed in a situation where they have few other options to do so. It is a very daunting and distressing endeavor to undertake. It is hard. It's like trying to function in a different language when you don't know how to speak that language. It's complex, and every step of the way is hard, and it makes smart people feel really inadequate. Definitely not something that anyone would choose to do at all. There are certainly a growing number of excellent resources in recent years that are available online, and there's many sources and links and things that people can find online. But now it's become almost a difficult task to know which are the right resources, which are the ones that I should use or listen to, rather than there not being enough. And even when there's things online, it still is really hard to know what to do with that information. What case law do you read? What is pertinent to your specific case, or how to exactly fill out the forms exactly the right way? Well, I don't have the answer myself, that's for sure. I think it's a complex situation that requires everyone involved in the system to try to chip away at it and work collaboratively at solutions. We definitely need to move away from the billable hour, the full retainer, and those types of ways of doing business in the legal or justice system. Most people simply can't afford to pay, large sums up front to retain a lawyer. Unbundled services is something that is interesting to lots of people, where citizens are able to hire a lawyer on a task-by-task basis or by the hour rather than a full retainer model. And we need to think much more creatively with technology and things that are maybe new to the justice system. Yes and no. There may be access to justice for some people, but certainly not all people. There's no data available for us to understand the numbers of people that simply turn away from the system and do nothing about their legal matter and are unable to access the system on their own and represent themselves, perhaps due to language barriers or disabilities or a lack of education. So there's an unknown cost to the access to justice issue that is really concerning, especially for such a civilized country like Canada. I think that the cost of legal services may be a little lower in more rural areas. We know that the highest number of self-represented litigants seems to be in urban centers where costs are much higher. That's a really interesting question. One research study by Dr. Julie McFarlane at the University of Windsor looked at lots of demographic information about SRLs. And what was found is most SRLs, or at least the majority, are in the middle years of their life, so middle-aged people rather than really young or older people. It reflects that this really isn't an issue that is just about poor people or people that are on the very low spectrum of income earners. Access to justice should be important to everyone in our society, regardless of whether you have a pending legal action around the corner. I like to think about access to justice in the context of access, the way we have and have come to think about access to education in Canada and access to healthcare in Canada, and certainly access to legal services ought to be right up there with providing citizens with basic needs to lead a successful and happy life.